Well, it's 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready. Now go, cat, go, but don't you step on my blue suede shoe. You can do anything but lay off of my blue suede shoe. Right.
Many of the artists who played Amory in the 50s would go on to become legends.
Go, cat.
Not only would Amory remember them, they would remember Amory. W.S. Fluke Holland, drummer for Johnny Cash for almost 40 years, got his start playing drums in the Carl Perkins Band.
Of all the places, Amory, Mississippi, for some reason, when Carl Perkins and his band performed, no matter who was on the show, if we were with Elvis or John or Jerry Lee or whoever, it's like the next day they had to put the new roof on the building.
Go, cat.
In Amory, as in many small towns, the owners of local radio stations and theaters brought entertainment to town. Charles Boren was both a pioneer in radio and owner of theaters in several northeast Mississippi communities. Movies to music, if it was happening, Boren usually was in the middle of it.
We listened to WAMY. Charlie Boren was a very good promoter of everything in Amory, and of course, great voice.
Charlie joined with Bob Evans and Bob McRaney in putting in WAMY. That was the first radio station, the only radio station in Amory. Charlie knew in some way what people wanted. They knew what they wanted to come to see. He was a promoter extraordinaire.
He had this station wagon and it had these speakers on the top of it, and he would go all over around all parts and announcing, you know, telling them what was going to be and where they was going to be.
And you'd go through there and you'd turn it down and you announce the next chapter of Zorro and whatever the movie might be. Or if Tex Ritter was going to be on the stage, he brought Tex Ritter to his movie theaters. He mainly promoted rockabilly, you might say now, and gospel.
The thing that stuck with me was all these performers would come, like Tex Ritter and Don Redberry and Elvis, of course, and Carl Perkins and Johnny Cash and Sunset Carson and all of them, and he'd get his speakers out. Well, he never did take them down. He just kept them on his car.
The late musician Jimmy Roby, as a child performer, played on the same bill with artists who had become giants in the music industry.
I was a little star in Amory. I played guitar and they had a little radio show. And then all the big shows that came to the theaters here, the National Guard Army, they'd be sure that they got me on the show, radio station would. So that's how I ended up on all them Elvis and Johnny Cash shows.
In fall 1955, Perkins played at the Armory with Johnny Cash. Cash would later recall on national TV and in his biography that it was after the Amory performance that he told Perkins about an Air Force buddy using the expression, "Don't step on my blue suede shoes." It could have been on the drive back to Tennessee, Holland speculates, when he heard Cash relating the song idea.
I was riding in the car with Marshall, and John and Carl was sitting in the back seat, and John was sitting in the back with his feet propped up on the front of the back of the front seat, and he's looking at his foot sticking up there, and he said, "Carl, you ought to write a song about some shoes." And that's about all there was to it. And then a little while later, I said, "Well, maybe you ought to write a song about some blue suede shoes or something."
Back home in Tennessee, a few nights later, Fluke Holland played with Carl and his brothers at Tommy's Drive-In, where Carl saw for himself how important a pair of shoes could be. He told the story in a 1992 interview on NBC.
At that point, Carl and I had 2 small children, and I was playing about 4 nights a week at the local, they call them clubs now, child, but they were called honky-tonks back then. And this cat one night had on a pair, he was dancing with a beautiful girl who had on a pleated skirt, and they did a lot of turning, and he said, don't step on my suedes. And he wasn't joking. And he hurt her feelings, and her pretty face said, oh, well, excuse me. And I thought, you fool. I'd like to have a pair of them shoes, but I would never tell a beautiful girl not to step on them.
Later that evening, he put pencil to paper and wrote the song that would put him in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
And I wrote blue suede shoes on a brown paper bag. All I was having to do was pick out the lines. They were flooding my soul, and I was thinking of things like burn my house, steal my car, drink my liquor from Whole Foods. I was just getting it down as fast as I could.
Perkins and his brothers auditioned Blue Suede Shoes for Sun Records in early December 1955, recording 3 versions of the song. Blue Suede Shoes was released in January 1956 with Honey Don't as side B.
See, actually, if you listen to Blue Suede Shoes, we didn't actually do the stops right on it. See, we didn't know to. We didn't rehearse, and nobody showed us how. The first time we actually played it is when we went to Memphis to record it.
Well, it's 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready. Now go, cat, go, but don't you step on my blue suede shoes. You can do anything, but lay off of my blue suede shoes.
The audience in Amory knew a hit when they heard one. The response to Blue Suede Shoes foretold the success of the song that would become Sun Records' first million seller. Other favorites were on the show that evening, School Night as many recall, but there was one star.
The night that they had Elvis National Guard Armory with Carl and Johnny Cash, actually Carl had just cut Blue Suede Shoes, but he hadn't released it yet. And he sang it and done it, and he brought the house down. You'll still run into people, even now, that say, well, I was at that show that night at the Armory. Oh, yeah, man, I remember Carl Perkins, he just stole the show.
Well, I went with Rob Lee and Albert and Curtis and Jimmy, I guess all of us that run the fish house, worked at the fish house and everything. We went that night.
And it was packed. It was a packed show because they got the bleachers there at the old Armory, and then Charlie had chairs out there too.
It cost $1 to get in and $2 for a reserve seat. So we didn't have $2, so she said, let's just go up there and get us one of them seats up front. Said, you can't do nothing to make us move. So that's what we said.
Elvis Presley was there, but Carl Perkins really stole the show.
Everybody would holler every time you go backstage. They'd clap their hands and holler at Carl Perkins. So they would let him come back out. I think he played Blue Suede Shoes several times.
Blue Suede Shoes, Carl Perkins sung that, and I don't remember what Elvis sung.
The impact of Perkins' crowd-pleasing performance was not lost on Elvis, whose contract had just been sold by Sun Records to RCA.
You burned my house, steal my car, you drank my liquor from my old fruit jar.
I think Elvis had 2 records out. He had That's All Right Mama and Mystery Train was his second one. And I was standing backstage. Elvis probably 19, 20, 21 years old. Had blonde hair, he didn't have the hair dyed back then. And he kept borrowing my comb. I had a little comb, you know, little pocket combs with your clip you stick in your pocket back then. And I bet you that boy borrowed my comb 50 times, combing DuckTales. That's the nervousest kid I ever seen in my life. He just total nerve. And Elvis and Carl was up on the stage singing Blue Suede Shoes, and he couldn't stand it. I mean, it was just tearing him up, you know.
Amory, Mississippi was the last time that Carl Perkins and Elvis ever performed together. That was the last show that they ever did together. I can't believe that it was jealousy. I mean, Elvis was Elvis. And I mean, you know, at that particular time, I mean, as far as his popularity in the South goes, Elvis was really starting to catch on. I think that it might, if you put yourself in Elvis's shoes, I mean, who wants to be considered the star of the show and then the man that's not the star of the show upstaging you? I think at that particular time, that was probably a wise decision on his part.
Blue Suede Shoes became Billboard magazine's first all-market hit in history, crossing over from country to rhythm and blues to pop charts, selling 2 million copies.
My earliest recollection that the song had changed our life was during the Christmas of 1956. Blue Suede Shoes came out January 2nd, 1956. And I can remember our Christmas of 56, the new electric train I got. Elvis recorded Blue Suede Shoes in August of 56. Dad's version of Blue Suede had already done its thing. It had already gone to the top of the charts. Elvis has got to like number 19 in the charts. Through the years, you know, a lot of folks that weren't in that early generation of the music, you know, think Blue Suede Shoes is an Elvis Presley song. But the reality of it is that it was and always will be a Carl Perkins song.
While Elvis would go on to become the king, Perkins gained his own acclaim as a major influence to many of rock and roll's superstars. The Beatles recorded more tunes by Carl Perkins than any other artist other than themselves.
I grew up during the Beatles. That was my music. And I met George Harrison in 1987. We was going to London to do a show. Needless to say, here I am, growing up a Beatle fan, and finally getting to meet one of the Beatles. It was just me and him and Dad. And you know what was really something to me? I looked at this whole situation, and there George Harrison was looking at my daddy the same way I was looking at George Harrison. And that's really when I knew the impact that my dad had had in the music business.
Perkins earned the status of legend. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987. The Encyclopedia of Southern Culture called him the finest songwriter of the country rock blend called rockabilly. Fluke Holland still has the drums he used on the Blue Suede Shoes recording, and that's not all he has in his music room at home in Jackson, Tennessee.
In Amory, Mississippi, we wore that band suit right there. That is the time period that we played Amory. What happened after the Blue Suede Shoes record was a hit, there was a shoe company named Douglas Shoe Company, and they started with a promotion thing about Blue Suede Shoes, and we did some commercials for them, and they started furnishing us with shoes. And there's one guy come here from Europe, he said, I gotta have them.
Stan Perkins played in his dad's band for more than 20 years, beginning in 1976. Blue Suede Shoes was always the last song.
When he would get into Blue Suede Shoes, even though we may be in a country where they didn't speak English, those fans would sing the song with him. They knew that song.
Named to the National Public Radio listing of top 100 songs of all time, Blue Suede Shoes, said music historian Nick Spitzer, tapped deep into the new youthful obsession with personal verve and style and developed a mutating life of its own. For Carl Perkins, it wasn't so complicated.
I think that he felt like that if that little old song, which is 2.5 minutes long, could bring happiness for whoever was listening to it, whether it was tapping their foot, then for that 2.5 minutes, they weren't worried about something else in their life. They had a smile on their face and they enjoyed it. And that meant a lot to him that he could reach that many people that they would feel that way for that duration of that song.
The 50s Armory shows are treasured memories for Amory residents because of the caliber of the music and the artists. not the scale of their production.
Back then they set the sound system up in 2 chairs on each side of the stage. The little speakers about that big, probably 200 watt, cover that big auditorium. They all traveled in one car. They had their when we all back then call them bass fiddle, had it tied on top. But here I'm seeing history being made and didn't even know it.
It was the fact that Amory was singled out. I mean, it could have been somewhere in Arkansas, it could have been somewhere in Texas, and that just kind of made it, put it a little more in perspective for me, that this place could be the starting point for a song, at least where the concept came about, for a song that changed music history, literally.
Indeed, in Amory, Mississippi, and around the world, Blue Suede Shoes lives on.
Well, it's 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready. Now go, cat, go, but don't you step on my blue suede shoes. You can do anything but lay off of my blue suede shoes. Well, you can knock me down, step in my face, slander my name all over the place, and do anything that you wanna do. But honey, lay off of my shoes and don't you step on my blue suede shoes. You can do anything but lay off of my blue suede shoes. Oh, let's go, cat. My house, steal my car, you drink my liquor from my old fruit jar, and do anything that you wanna do. But honey, lay off of them shoes and don't you step on my blue suede shoes. You can do anything but lay off of my blue suede shoes. Right. For the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready. Now go, cat, go, but don't you step on my blue suede shoes. You can do anything but lay off of my blue suede shoes. But it's blue, blue, blue suede shoes, blue, blue, blue suede shoes, yeah, blue, blue, blue suede shoes, baby, blue, blue, blue suede shoes. You can do anything but lay off of my blue suede shoes.
All right. Cool, all right.